is why it's very important for the Normans to have horses, because without those horses, they're not going to be able to go into battle. There's no such thing as the Norman Knight. There's no such thing. Folks, welcome back to our podcast on Normans versus Mongols, and today we're going to be talking about the Norman war horse. Now, this is going to be a very brief video. We're not going to go way into depth about how the horses were fed logistically while on campaign, or how they were maintained during peacetime, and so on. That will be discussed in a future video. Today, we're going to talk about just the horse itself, basis, very brief, very cut, very dry. If that sounds interesting, let's hop into it. So for starters, the Norman war horse between the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries was about 14 to 15 hands tall and weighed anywhere from 800 to 1,000 pounds. And they were stallions. This is very important to note because a very funny and interesting anecdote happened during a battle of the first the first crusade, and to retake Jerusalem, and I will discuss that in a future video in great detail. And if you want to know what it was, I discussed it previously right here and my earlier video on 5 things that made the Normans an effective military. So they were stallions, and they were bred just for war. Now I want to point out that since we're talking about horses in plural, and today we're discussing the destrier, the Norman war horse, and it's good to note that you would not ride this war horse to the battle. You would have a separate mount that was not a war horse, that was not bred for war, that was not as expensive as that horse up to that point. The reason why is because you want the war horse fresh, just so you can impact the enemy with all your might. At the Battle of Sharami, Roger of Sicily's knights, when they rolled up to the hill, they were not riding their war horses, they were riding their mounts, and they had their war horses in tow. And while they were defending against the enemy, before they charged down the hill to attack them, they then mounted their war horses and did so. By keeping these troops very fresh, it's kind of like you have reserves within your ranks that have not expended any energy, and once the time comes, you could hit them with full force, and it does a whole lot more damage. Now, breeding was very, very important. It was meticulously done by the Normans, and they became very, very good at it. Remember, during this period, these were not the only horse warriors on the planet. There were Turks, there were Saracens, there were Muslim warriors. The Byzantine had their own cavalry force. The Franks had their own force, aside from what the Normans had when they first showed up, and so on. Now, there is a factor that makes it very different for the Normans with their horse. That factor came from where they were breeding them. They were breeding them in the Duchy of Normandy. Naturally, the geology of this place makes it excellent for breeding war horses. It's got limestone and chalky mountains, and all those elements make the grass there very, very rich in calcium, which gives the strength, for the bones. Everyone knows, you drink your milk, you want strong bones. Calcium makes your bones strong, and it's excellent nutrients in that ground, specifically for breeding horses. And so, naturally, they already had an edge over a lot of the people around them because they built strong horses. Now, the way it was done for breeding the horses, you pick out a stallion that had the characteristics you want. You want to have aggression, you want to have strength, and you want to have feistiness. You don't want him disobedient, but you do want him strong because he's going to be charging into battle. Now, after you would do that, you would take that horse, and the traits that he shares, his offspring are more than likely going to share. Now, you want to continue breeding those traits that you like and breed out the ones you don't want. Now, this is where the tricky part comes in, because if you have a corral full of your females, and one stallion that you don't want breeding in with you breaks into there, which is very possible to happen, and then mates with some or a bunch of your female horses, well, now he's ruined your entire process, because all those offspring that come out are going to have the traits that you don't want, and you've got to start all over again. So the Normans were very particular in making sure this did not happen. And horses were extremely prized among them. A lot of people talk about how the Eastern Empire treated horses very well. Normans did as well. As a matter of fact, you could purchase large plots of land with as little as 6 horses. There are accounts of that happening in Normandy during the time Normans were in power. Europe during the time Normans were in power. William the Conqueror was given gifts of Spanish horses from many of his allies. So they did appreciate their horses. And like I said, they were specifically bred for war. And to show the difference in the expense for one, a regular workhorse could cost 14 shillings. A Norman war horse, the destrier, you're not going to get for any less than 20 pounds. They cost anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds. So the expense between the two is extremely great. And the reason why is because, like I said, they were not cheap to acquire, and they spent a lot of time training them specifically for battle. So there you have it, folks. That's all we have for today. If you want to find more in the future, let me know the link below and comment down below who do you think's going to win, Normans versus Mongols. And stay tuned. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Mongol horse. And in the future, we're going to discuss the logistics on the battlefield of how the horses moved, how they were fed, and so on. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.